Hey everyone, Dan here. Real quick, before we get into this tutorial, this video is actually part of my brand new Unity course where we build a complete item and inventory system in Unreal Engine 5. If you're interested in RPG style systems or learning to build foundational systems that can be used for all of your games, I think you'll get a lot out of it. And right now, I've got a limited 35% discount for the course. You can find the link down below. All right, so let's dive into the design of our item system and our inventory system. But first, let's answer the question, what is an item system? An item system is the overall framework for our game that's going to handle the definition, the creation, and overall management of all items in the game. The item system should work for everything that we have inside the game. So our player inventory, our equipable items, our consumable items, or just any items that are in the world. The item system should support that behavior. Well, why do we need an item system? Well, without an item system, items end up being created and managed all scattered throughout your code base and in a very inconsistent way. And so as your game or project scales up and you need to add more items of varying different types, then you have to create new and unique ways to actually maintain all those items, and that just doesn't work. So a item system really provides us consistency, scalability, flexibility, really maintainability, and a flexible integration pattern. So consistency, if we have a dedicated core item system, everything's going to follow the same rules and structure. And in the future, when you're adding more items or different types of items to your project, then you know exactly how things are going to work. With a very core item system, we know that we can easily add item types or properties without writing or rewriting large portions of our game. We can support multiple item categories, all with one framework, which provides one source of truth for us to actually build our items. And because we have one source of truth, we have minimal files that we need to actually edit or replace or change when we need to make updates, instead of having to deal with a whole bunch of files. And last but not least, it provides a shared language that our entire project can count on and use as we need throughout our game. So our inventory, our looting, our crafting, they all know that the items that we're interacting with are the same items every single time. And that's what one item system is going to give us. And that's why it's so important for us to build one as part of a core system inside our game. All right, so we want to talk about the core classes that make up our item system. And there's three main principles or subjects that I really want to cover when we discuss what our item system is and how it's going to work. The first one we have on the left, which is our item definition. The item definition is really just a static container of information or properties about our item. That's the name, the type, the description. It can have an icon, a mesh, the maximum stack size. It's really up to you, but this is basically an unchanging template of what all of our items will be based on. And the way we're going to structure our item definition, we'll be able to support multiple different item types going forward, but at the core, they have all this base information. In the middle, in the blue, we have the item factory. The item factory is responsible for taking these item definitions and using a whole bunch of static functions to actually build the item instances or the spawnable items that we can use inside our game. The item factory is the sole place where all items will be built and created for our game. And this makes it extremely maintainable and easy to add to when we need, because we know all the items come from this one existing class. This is basically our item creation service. You can rely on it to successfully create all the items that you need for your game. Last but not least is our item instance. The item instance is a runtime object that represents a copy of an item definition that is returned from the item factory. The item instances are going to store all the information that are required to maintain proper state of that item. So think the quantity of the item we might have, the durability, if there's any enchantments or upgrades that are on it. If you want to randomize the stats, you can do that on a specific item instance. And all these are created from the item definition inside the item factory. The item instances are what are going to make up, the item instances will make up our inventory, will be what we use to craft things. It's going to be what the player uses in the game. And again, they're built from the item definition inside the item factory. So in the next set of videos, we're going to deep dive each of these three core areas that make up our item system. All right, so we're in JetBrains Writer. This is where we're going to be building all the C++ items and files that we need. And as you can see in the solution finder here on the left, we have a folder called items course. This is the name of our project. Within that, we also have engine, games, programs, rules, visualizers. These are all the project files default to Unreal Engine. The one that we care about is the games folder. And then inside the games folder, you're going to see the project title again called item course or whatever you named your project. And in that, you're going to see dependencies, config, and source. We are going to want to be in the source file. And then specifically inside the source file, we want to be in the item course folder. So the first thing that we want to do for our item course and the item system really that we're building is we want to define the data asset that's going to store our item information. If you remember, we talked about being data-driven, and in order to be data-driven, we need to design and define what our core data asset looks like for our item system. And that's what we're going to do in this part of the course. So if you right-click on Item Course, you go to Add, click Unreal Engine Class. We're going to name this Item Definition. Click the All Classes tab, and here we're going to type in and search for our primary data asset. The primary data asset uses Unreal Engine's asset management system, which is a really powerful tool and something that we're going to leverage a lot in this course. So once we've named it item definition, you've selected primary data asset. For the base folder, we want to select public. Now, once the folders generate, I'll explain a little bit more between the public and private. But after this, inside our path, we want to put a backslash and say items. And then I like to say assets. So we're going to create a new folder called items. This will be for our entire item system. Inside that, we're going to create a folder called assets, where we're going to store the definition or the primary data asset classes, the files, for our item definitions. And you can see where it's going to head the header file and the CPP file here. It gives you an example. So let's go ahead and click create or OK. Give it a second to generate the classes. It's going to generate some boilerplate code. You can see that here. And now inside our item courses folder, we have two folders, public and private. And if I expand these, you can see the folder structure that we just created along with that path, where we have items, assets, and then our CPP file, which is where we're going to program any additional logic, and then our header file, where we'll declare all the variables that we want inside public. So now, let's go ahead and actually start our primary data asset. So inside the item definition file, this is the .h header file. This is what you should have something similar. It should look like this. What we'd like to do here is at the top, just say this, just a quick definition or a description of what this file does. So we're going to say this defines our base item data asset, something like that. You can add more description to it as you need, but I think this will be fine for what we need at the moment. So the next thing that we want to do is inside this uClass macro, we want to extend or make available this uItem definition, one, as a variable type inside the editor, and two, is something that you can extend in blueprints. So inside the uClass macro here, that's what this line is a macro for built into Unreal Engine. We want to say blueprint type and then blueprint table. So basically both of these commands tell Unreal that this item definition can be exposed inside the editor as a blueprint or as a variable and as something that you can create a new blueprint from. So now let's talk about what else we need to add to our basic information. So in our design, we talked about having a set of data that we called kind of our display data that includes the name, description, and other similar information, other identifying information that we might use in the UI. So maybe like an icon. And we want to create a structure that we can actually leverage this. So we're going to call here, we're going to say this will be a display structure. And we'll get into a moment exactly how we're going to do that. The other thing that we talked about is that we want to leverage gameplay tags. Gameplay tags will allow us to add additional information. So we're going to say we want some gameplay tags to add other information. And then we talked about having some sort of gameplay info, right? We talked about having things like stack size or a weight that's associated with our item, or even a base value or cost of what this item can sell for or be purchased for, right? So this is also going to be a structure. So now that we have kind of the setup of what we want, we need to implement these structures and these gameplay tags. And so in the next video, that's what we're going to do. All right, so we want to set up our display structure, our display item structure. And remember, a structure is just a way to hold like values. And the way we're going to do that is by defining one specifically called item display info. So the way we do this is inside our items folder, I'm going to right click and add, and I'm going to add a new directory. Inside this, I'm going to call this structures. Now, just a note, the way that I'm organizing my files is the way I like to organize my files, and is not necessarily the way you have to do it. There is no set standard. There is some guidelines, but there's no set specific way that you have to organize your files. This is just generally how I like to do it. So now that we've created the structures folder, I want you to right click on that, add, and we're going to go down here to where it says to here where it says class instruct. And here we want to type in the name of our new struct, and it's going to be item display info. And then make sure you select struct and then hit enter. Here it's going to build a basic C++ struct. Now this works for C++, but for Unreal we want to do something a little different. So I'm going to double click item display info, hit Control C on my keyboard to copy that. I'm then going to delete this, and I'm going to type in hashtag include. And we want to say, I thought autocomplete would work there, but we want to say item display info.h. And then I'm going to move over just a little bit, and we're going to type the word generated. So generated.h. What this is going to do, this is going to tell Unreal Engine in just a moment when we, actually let's add it. So now we're going to add a uStruct macro. And the uStruct macro, we want to use the uStruct macro, hit enter. This is going to generate the code that we need for our structure, including a generated body macro. This is very specific to Unreal Engine. The uStruct is a macro that tells Unreal Engine to generate a structure that can be used inside Unreal Engine. And this is important for the reflection system. This allows Unreal Engine to know what all the different structures and classes and things that we create are and why they're associated to the game that we're creating. So the important part here, we added this line so that we could generate this little bit of code. This generated.h file, this include statement, is extremely crucial if you add the generated body. If you do this and it doesn't exist, it will not work. The project will not compile. So now that we have this, I'm going to highlight and erase my struct, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste in item display info. So what you should have here is something that says struct f item display info, and this is the base setup of our structure. The last thing that we want to do in here is make this a blueprint type. This will just allow us to expose this structure inside the Unreal Engine editor as a potential variable inside blueprints. Okay. So now that we got the hard part out of the way, we want to define all the attributes that are inside our item display info structure. So the best way we do this is by saying uProperty. We're going to say this is edit anywhere and blueprint read write. And the last thing we want to do is set up a category, and in parentheses, or excuse me, in quotes, we're going to say display. This is a macro for Unreal Engine. There's a lot of macros inside Unreal Engine, but this is a macro telling the engine that what we're about to define is a property. It's allowed to be edited anywhere. Blueprints can read to it and write to it, and it provides us a nice category so that we can organize our data in a more efficient manner inside the editor. So now that we have this uProperty macro set up, we want to define the item name. So I'm going to say ftext, and we're going to call this name. I'm going to copy this, and we're going to add the other fields that we want. So the next one's going to be ftext, and this is going to be a description. Now there's another macro, or excuse me, another attribute qualifier that we can add to the property macro. So after a category, we're going to add a comma, and we're going to say meta, and inside the meta tag, we're going to say multi-line. This is going to allow us to create inside the editor, a multi-line field for the ftext description. Okay, so we have a few more things that we want to add. I'm going to copy my U property again, paste it in. Inside this, we want to do a T soft object pointer. And I'll explain what that is in just a moment. And we're going to say U texture 2D. And instead of texture like it did here, we want to call this an icon. And what I like to do to be very explicit is say soft pointer. So this is telling me that this is a icon soft pointer. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is a soft pointer? Well, a T soft object pointer is really going to point to the path of where the icon is located inside the folder structure in the editor. When this data asset loads, we don't want it to automatically load all the associated data. Imagine if we try to load 100 data item definitions all at once, and we had to load all those same icons at once, even though we're not displaying those. That's bad practice. So what we like to do is use a T soft object pointer instead. This is again going to point to the path where the icon itself is saved. And then what we can do is when we need the icon, we can call the T icon soft object pointer and just actually load it on demand when we need to see the image. Okay, so now we're going to paste this in again. We want our U property macro, and we're going to use the same idea where we say T soft object pointer. In this case, we're going to use a U static mesh. And we're going to call this mesh soft object pointer. And I'm going to add a qualifier here, just call this world. And the idea here is that this will be the mesh or the 3D model that will be used to display our item inside the game. So here now we have a name, a description, a soft pointer to our icon, and then another soft pointer to the actual 3D model that we're going to use to show our item in the world. Remember, this is all for display information. And then last but not least, we want to do this one more time. And we want to say T subclass of actor. So remember, an actor is the base class inside Unreal Engine for anything that's in our scene or in our map. And we're going to call this override world drop class and world drop class. And we're going to set this to a null pointer for now. And I also want to set our default pointers here to null as well. So what is a override world drop class? So the way that this item system is designed is that by default, we're going to build a system that will spawn the item into the world. And once it does, it's going to leverage this 3D asset. And we're going to create one class that is our spawnable item inside the world. But in specific instances, you might want to override that one item class and have a very specific actor class that displays this item very differently or has some different type of game interaction. And so we want to have the ability to have an override so it doesn't always have to use that default class. Towards the end of this course, when we start talking about world spawning, this will come into play. These last two will definitely come into play when we get later on in the course. But for now, this defines our display info. So this is the entire structure that we need to actually display our item information to our character, or to our item, excuse me. So let's go into the item definition header file. Remember, this is the U item definition header file where we said we wanted to have our display structure. And so what we want to do now is type in we want to type in F item display info. Here I'm going to add include, and we're just going to call this display info. Now we need to do one more thing. And just like we did inside our item display info structure, we need to add this uProperty macro. So I'm actually going to copy this uProperty macro, highlight it, Control C to copy, come back in, and above our display info, I'm gonna hit Control V to paste. And this is actually going to create our uProperty macro, tell Unreal Engine that we want to be able to edit this entire structure. And because we did that, we now get access to all of these variables that we can edit. And once we finish the definition and adding all the variables to our item definition, we'll test this out and we'll make sure that we can actually create, it'll make a little bit more sense when we get inside the editor. So that's the display info. In the next video, we're going to take a look at how we add the gameplay info. Okay, so I was testing out, just making sure that the code worked. And the way I did that is I went up to press play at the top here. And with the generation of JetBrains, now this doesn't happen on every time or every computer that I actually use to develop, but this is a common problem that I wanted to talk through and show you. Sometimes when the header file and CPP file generate, it adds an extra line of code here at the top that's absolutely not required. And it's usually grayed out. And again, this is in our item display info structure CPP file. And so all I need to do is delete that, double click, highlight it, and delete. And your CPP file should just look like this for your structure. Remember, this is a pretty common problem. So just make sure that that's resolved, and then your structure should work properly. The other thing that we need to make sure that we do is add this public declaration inside our item definition header file. So again, I'm in the item definition header file. In our class, where we defined the structure for our item definition, I've added the public identifier here with a colon. This is just going to make sure that this variable is accessible publicly and usable inside the editor and other areas of our code base. So once you've done that, and maybe if you've had that problem, you should be able to press play and the project should load just fine and Unreal Engine will open up. Perfect. So you can see that the Unreal Engine is actually loading. Our project has compiled. And before we jump on to the next few structures, I actually do want to show you inside the game what we just coded, how it actually works inside the editor. So inside our item course, you see we have our third person map. It's the default course. Inside our content folder, I'm going to zoom in just a bit to make it a little easier to see. And we are going to right click and add a new folder, and we're going to call this items. Inside our items folder, we're going to create a new folder called assets. And this is where we're going to put all of our data assets or our data that define our items in the game. So I'm going to right click and say, at the search bar, we're going to type in data asset. This is going to come up with miscellaneous data asset. This is what we want. And if in the search bar, I type in item definition, you can see the primary data asset that we just created. So you're going to select that, hit select. For a name, I'm going to say DA underscore test item. The naming here is up to you. Generally in Unreal Engine, we like to use DA for data asset underscore and then a unique name. Double click to open this up. Mine open up on another monitor, but I'm going to dock it here. And inside this, you can see right away that this is a asset type of item definition. And you can see our display information, which has our name, a description, our icon soft pointer, our mesh pointer, and then our actor class. So here we can actually type in a name. This is a test item. And we can say this as our description. This is a basic item that we are using for testing. You can see it's multi-line, just like we said so. For our icon soft pointer, we can select a default icon, which we'll add some more later in the course. But we'll just select this one for now. For our world mesh, you can select whatever mesh you like. And then for a class, we don't actually have this implemented yet, but we'll do that later in the course. But you can see that our item asset is taking shape already just by adding that one display info structure. So now in the next video, we're going to add the gameplay info structure, and we'll slowly expand this item data asset.